Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you a technique where you stitch the straight stitch, but into curved lines. Now I know it sounds a little confusing. That's because it isn't exactly a technique that many people use. Essentially, we're stitching railroad tracks, but I'm going to stitch them in a curved formation. It gives an interesting shape, one that doesn't start or end because it just is continuous, and it's a very simple thing to do. You can make this shape as large or as small as you want. You can vary the size of the lines that you stitch, the little straight stitches. You can make them close together or far apart. You can even make that into a pattern. I use variegated thread for this technique because I think it really shows off the little color variations quite nicely. It's a very interesting technique, it's easy to do, and it adds a totally different element to your work. And I also show you how I use it in my work, and I hope this inspires some ideas how you can use it, maybe with a little variation as well. So let's get started.
So here's an example of that repeated straight stitch that makes an interesting shape. It's kind of like adding a ribbon or a couching stitch, but just using the repeated straight stitch. And because I took this variegated thread, you get a lot of variation in the stitches that you don't have to switch colors with your needle and thread. So I really like this technique for using variegated thread, but also for adding texture. You could do this just as easily using the same color thread that you have fabric background, and it adds another element. They could be train tracks or something abstract. Depending on how you choose it, it can be a letter or something. So it's a very interesting technique. So let's get started with that. So you'll need your backing to get started. I have just a piece of quilted fabric, and I just stitched a very easy running stitch right around all the sides with a little piece of muslin. And I really like this effect. You can use quilted fabric plain, but I just didn't want too many textures competing with each other. So that's why I chose this plain fabric. Again, it's optional and it's just a design element. I chose my thread. It's this variegated thread that has pinks and purples and yellows. And as I pull it out, you can see all the different colors and how they kind of evolve. So variegated thread is very lovely, but you need to have enough stitches to really get that variegation to show. So now I use my Frixion pen. This step is optional. I just think it makes it very easy for me. It's a Pilot Frixion pen. I find it in the office supply section. And now I just want to create my shape. I try not to cross over the shapes. Again, that step is optional, so if you want to cross over your lines, go ahead. But I think it's kind of interesting to make just a moving shape that doesn't touch itself until it finishes off. So that's a very small shape. You can make it larger, like I showed you with the purple fabric. But it's just very interesting. You can make it circular as well. And then I just take my thread, and I've knotted the end, and I can start anywhere I want. I think I'll just start right on this side. And I try and create all my stitches the same length. So that's less than 1/4 of an inch. Now I'll just try and space them going around this shape. So all of my stitches kind of change direction when there's a curve, and then I'll just keep them straight on the straightaway. It's kind of a very interesting effect. It's a very simple technique. I'm using all 6 strands of embroidery floss here, but you could divide the thread as well. That's the beauty of this technique, is you can really get a lot of variation depending on the elements you choose. The fabric background, the thread, the number of strands of embroidery floss, the length of the stitches, the closeness together or the far apart. You get a lot of variation. And if you think you made a wonky stitch, well, just take it out and start again. It's just a very interesting piece. Because of the curved lines, it's very soft on the eyes, and it also directs the eye around the finished piece, which is kind of a neat effect. You can use it to frame something or to draw the eye to your focal point. When I have this shape stitched all by itself, it becomes the focal point, but when I incorporate it with other pieces, it adds a very complex element. And I'll show you that at the end when I show you the finished piece and how I use that in my work, or at least one of the ways that I use this stitch in my work. I like using the variegated thread for this technique because it's just such a pretty way to get the variation. You change one element, and that would be the thread. So I have a continuous shape, but it's made up of different color little stitches. So that's kind of interesting. It's a little unusual. I really like variegated thread, but a lot of times my pieces are so small that the variation of color doesn't really show through. So this is a technique that works well for that. Now, one of the reasons I don't like crossing over my lines is because I think it has a really clean effect this way. It's totally reasonable to cross your lines on a project if that's your intention. But for me, and my intention on this project was just to have those clean lines, that clean shape. Now, if you skip a spot and you find that you've skipped it, you can always go back and throw in a little stitch. You just can't be too far ahead, or else your thread will have changed the shade and the color already. Now, one other tip when using the variegated thread, if you come to a point where you end your thread, like here I ended it on the pink, and I'm going to start a new piece of thread, because I tied the knot off, there wasn't very much left of the pink, and I didn't have enough thread to keep stitching to let it change color. So from my next thread where I thread my needle, I'm going to thread my needle, and then I can either clip off the thread, like here there's only a little bit of yellow, I can clip that off and just continue with the pink, or because I started with the yellow, I can change my stitching and come back here and continue it around, which is what I think I'm going to do. So I'll start my stitch over here instead of the area of the pink where I left off, just because my thread ended that way. And it's kind of a little bit of a gamble. I'm not sure where my thread color is going to be when I match it up with the pink, but at least this way I'm matching it up with one side. Continue stitching all the way around. And there I stitched all the way around that shape that I just quickly sketched out with the marker. And now, just to get rid of that marker, just take a hot iron and press it right down all over that shape. I really make sure I press it well so that the marker doesn't come back. It needs that heat to erase it. And I use the hottest setting that my fabric will tolerate. So that's the completed piece using this technique. So those are the shapes that we made using the variegated thread. Very interesting effect. But I wanted to show you how I use this in my work. So here are all the stitches going down one side of the piece, and then you can't really see it, but it comes up this side as well. I have a little fabric collage, I have a little quilted piece, and I have the stitches that go all the way around. So it adds texture, some elements, and it draws the eye. Plus I kept these round shapes. They're a little more intentional than just scribbling around a shape. They just go up and down, but they're all rounded and very soft.
So that's how I use the straight stitch in my work in a little unconventional way. I love how the straight stitch, these straight lines with a very clear beginning and end, when combined in repetition can create a very interesting and soft shape. And the addition of the variegated thread, well, that's something altogether new, and I really enjoy that effect. I like the way in my work it creates a focal point, it draws the eye, and it can be varied so easily. If you found this video helpful, please consider joining my channel as a paid membership. It's just a small fee every month. You'll get exclusive videos for paid members, as well as access to the video library of different techniques that I have, aside from the ones that I post weekly. If you've enjoyed this video though, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. That's something you can do to really help my channel. Thanks so much for joining me today.